Test.
Sorry. Tested.
Sorry, what was that?
I just tested because the live stream.
No, I'm just opportunistically charging my phone.
Good call.
It's not charging.
Hi everyone, we're just starting in a minute or two and we're just testing the audio for the live stream. So people start taking a seat, that would be great. Thanks. And everyone will be glad to know that the sound works.
Welcome everyone to National Science Week. What a turnout, full house again. My name is Yolanda Sam, co-founder of the AI Collaborative Network. We're a community organisation founded here in Adelaide a year ago to support the Australian AI ecosystem. In a world where we are seeing AI permeate into all aspects of our lives, it is important for everyone to understand what AI is and why we need to consider the implications of AI being used in areas such as healthcare, education, government services, transport, and even disaster relief. As we depend on AI systems for making decisions and predictions that affect us, how can we trust those decisions? Who is responsible for those decisions? And who is accountable for unintended consequences? This is an evolving issue that can't be solved overnight, nor can we rely solely on AI practitioners to drive this conversation. So here we are tonight, presenting to you an absolutely stellar program which covers all things AI ethics, designed not to give you all the answers, but to make you think. This was made possible through a grant from National Science Week, which has enabled us to bring together 3 fabulous speakers and 6 panellists with a range of expertise to join us not just here in Adelaide, but to all of those tuning in from around Australia. There are almost 200 people in this room, and 600 people, actually about 620 people at last count, who are attending all around the country and online. Thank you to all of our co-hosts in Melbourne, Sydney, Perth, Canberra, Hobart, and Brisbane. While this looks like a really crazy slide with a lot of logos, what it represents is a community that has come together to bring you the Ethics of AI 2019. We would also like to thank continued sponsors of our network, the Australian Institute for Machine Learning, Taito AI, Resilient, UniSA, and IBM. The format of tonight will be 3 talks, which includes a live demo and a panel discussion. We are on a tight schedule tonight, so we ask that you wait until the panel discussion to ask any of your burning questions. And yes, to the online and interstate audience, we've got you covered. Last of all, let's light up Twitter with all of your insights, questions, and curiosities on AI ethics. So tweet us at AI Collaborative, and our hashtags are AI Ethics and Science Week. I encourage you to put these hashtags in your Twitter name to spark the conversation around Australia. I'm now going to welcome the Chief Scientist for South Australia, Caroline McMillen, to officially open the evening for us.
Thank you so much, Yolanda. And firstly, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Kaurna people. I acknowledge their enduring spiritual connection to this land, and I pay my respects to elders both past, present, and those emerging. I'd like to thank the Australian Collaborative Network for really bringing us together in National Science Week. To have an artificial intelligence collaborative network is really prescient, and tonight's topic, I think, is not only prescient, it's necessary, it's essential, and I think there'll be a very vigorous discussion and debate both within the panel and with the audience here. It's wonderful that this could be part of National Science Week. Unfortunately for me, it means I don't get to hear all of the debate tonight, but I'm looking forward to seeing the recording. Now, yesterday I had a great opportunity. It was an opportunity to attend a full day in Canberra, a full day meeting in Canberra, focused on space, collaboration and commercialisation. Now, this meeting, of course, had a focus on those technologies which we would recognise as being primarily space-specific, such as smart satellites, something that we here in South Australia are extraordinarily focused on and good at. And also on technologies such as robotics and artificial intelligence, which are not only important as we move from Earth to space and back from space to Earth, but of course across many sectors beyond space, across healthcare, across education, manufacturing, and as Yolanda said, all aspects of our lives. So as I came back, I was reflecting how the meeting itself had a strong focus on the responsible development, deployment and sustainment of space technologies to support an international space sector culture with appropriate regulatory frameworks and sets of mutual obligations as a values-based framework. And I flew home and I was reflecting on those thoughtful and balanced discussions on technologies and their potential role in that complex space of space. Then I decided to log into the Qantas entertainment system. It had been a long day and I did get the flu in Canberra, where I landed on a documentary on robot killers powered by artificial intelligence. I immediately highlighted how in 24 hours, in one day, you can almost find that dual perceptions that can coexist in communities on considering the benefits of the responsible deployment of technologies such as AI and their purported risks through robot killers. Now, this may be, in part, a consequence of many factors, and I think we'll be going through those tonight with the experts here. For many of us in the community, myself included, the term artificial intelligence can mean very many different things to us. Is it the same as machine learning? Is computer vision the same as facial recognition? There's a lot of terminology, and we find it difficult to land that relationship between what AI encompasses. And it's this lack of shared language that can often confound our discussions and debates. And in part, that confusion on what AI is because the field of AI has such a complex ancestry and also an apparently limitless future. It's harnessed basic techniques from a range of fields we feel familiar with, such as maths and statistics, some perhaps less so, search and optimization. Then we get to natural language processing, computer vision, machine learning, neural networks, game theory, just to name a few of those key strands that converge to generate the field of AI. And not all of those are familiar or known to us. And then the methods, of course, of AI are deployed across a breadth of industry sectors. It might be e-commerce, it might be banking, health, agtech, environmental monitoring. We read how Alibaba, the e-commerce company, in one day last year, in the Singles Day, took $30 billion in 24 hours. The first billion was in 85 seconds. The first order was deployed in Washington within 8 minutes from the warehouse to the customer because of the power of AI-fueled algorithms that allowed Alibaba as a major e-commerce player to understand its customers' needs within the time frame to achieve that massive outcome, with the robots in the warehouse clearly running the wheels off. So we can literally see the span and reach, and some of that gives us pause. Then we have to layer in within this boundaries of our confounders and sharing of language around AI, the different societal standpoints which we are faced with. Industries focus on algorithms and efficiency and increasing productivity. Communities can focus on loss of jobs, ethics, privacy and security, and governments' preoccupations can be on national competitiveness and national security. And this is a pretty reasonable preoccupation by governments, because work from our own Australian Institute of Machine Learning concluded that AI has the potential to increase global productivity by 40%. The impact on our productivity will be transformative, with the downside that if we fail to adapt in our business sectors and adopt, we will quickly find ourselves, in a sense, in an economic and potentially societal backwater. So, I think, as stated by Alessandro Anonini from the Joint Research Centre in the European Commission, which was cited in a really good report in the Elsevier report in 2019, I recommend it to you, and he quoted, "Looking at the world of digital transformation, we live in an era that can be defined as the Cambrian explosion of data, and advanced data analytics are needed for us to navigate this world. AI is central to this change, offers major opportunities to improve our lives, but ethical and secure by design algorithms are crucial to building trust in this disruptive technology. We also need a broader engagement of civil society on the values that need to be embedded in AI and directions for future development, hence tonight being so prescient." I found it really interesting. This report looked at 600,000 research, education, and media outputs which related to artificial intelligence. And they found that ethics keywords in the research outputs in that vast amount of global literature were not currently explicitly visible when they used AI machine learning to understand AI and machine learning. So those keywords didn't seem to immediately come up from that trawl through using great search and optimization, current topics related to ethics. And that posed a question for them whether ethical analysis is actually seen to be a central issue among AI researchers, and whether such discussions are conducted outside the AI field and other fields of research, or whether they take place outside of research altogether. And then they also found that the vocabulary which related to ethics that was used from the perspectives of teaching, research, industry, and media sources found more differences between those fields and how ethics was discussed, the vocabulary used, than was in common. So much of the technical work we know is the focus of research that addresses most of that technical work that addresses the ethics of AI, but it tends to focus on the ethical quality at the level of an algorithm. And as AI algorithms and models get more complex, there's been a rise in the call for explainability and to question whether there's any unconscious bias in the result. And it's brilliant tonight you're going to get from world experts, an opportunity to unpack this. And it's been argued that successful artificial intelligence is inclusive artificial intelligence, one that can account for diversity of age, gender, or origin. But there is a challenge here for me in particular, as a woman who's been a scientist in STEM field for more years than I care to remember. If we are to consider, for instance, let's take mathematics as a really foundation discipline. Mathematics and information communications technology, really foundation disciplines for AI, and you look at the proportion of research outputs in mathematics and ICT across all Australian universities that have female authors. This is the work you can argue is the platform from which AI is drawn. The proportion of female authorships on papers in mathematics and ICT in Australian universities is 12.5% between 2014 and 2017, and hadn't changed in 5 years. So if we're going to achieve diversity in terms of gender, we're going to have to go well before the algorithm started, right back into ensure that there is a pipeline of those from different backgrounds and able to generate successful and inclusive AI. Now, finally, reference to ethics and AI also appear in very different ways in the public domain. The main approaches include consideration of what is the purpose of AI, the ways to incorporate beliefs, desire, and intentions into it, and the potential risk of abuse of AI, hence robot killers. So what is therefore clear in 2019 is that addressing this question needs us to sort out our vocabularies, to sort out our different languages that are being used in the different domains, to consider all the way through from an algorithm, its deployment, and then well beyond into the societal values, and will require collaboration between researchers, technologists, policymakers, citizens, educators, and perhaps most importantly, card-carrying ethicists who have been thinking for some of these issues for, across a millennium. So, tonight is a great opportunity to unpack this, to really begin to see how we can address the ethical concerns and how we can ensure that the right balance ultimately can be struck between responsible innovation and responsible regulation in AI. So I feel as if I've just got nicely confused by the field. I've got nicely across why I think the evening is going to be so key, and I feel like I'm now going to have to wait to the second episode to find out what the answers are. You will be well ahead of me. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. Without further ado, let me introduce you to our keynote for the evening. Ellen Broad is a leading data expert, having worked in the UK as Head of Policy at the Open Data Institute, is a member of the Australian Government's Data Advisory Council, author of Made by Humans, the AI Condition, and currently the Head of Technical Delivery for Consumer Data Standards at CSIRO's Data 61. Having travelled all the way from Canberra, please give a warm welcome to Ellen Broad.
Thank you very much. I'd also like to pay my respects to the Kaurna people, the custodians of the ancestral lands on which we meet, and perhaps in the spirit of National Science Week, do a small shout out for you to look up or follow on social media accounts like Indigenous X, the Indigenous Data Network, some of the deadly women in STEM, Tamina Pitt, Celeste Carnegie, Michaela Jade. There's just a lot of phenomenal Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander experts working in this area as well. So, without further ado, kind of what am I doing here? I kind of ask myself this question existentially on a regular basis at the moment, because I'd say I stumbled into AI ethics almost by accident, or perhaps it was fortuitous timing. It started back in about 2015 when we were asked, whilst I was working in the UK for the Open Data Institute, to develop a set of ethical principles specifically around the use of personal data. And at the time, we felt like there was more to it than personal data. And when you tried to look for examples of ethical frameworks for managing data at the time, the primary frameworks that exist, the principles that existed, were in relation to personal data and really concerned with privacy. So they would simply kind of guide you on principles for consent, principles for de-identification of data, principles for ongoing use of personal data. And we wanted to push the envelope and broaden the kind of perspectives around ethics to, well, how do we use data that we have been given consent to use? How might we misuse it? How might others interpret it? Who owns it? Who owns it not only in a legalistic sense, but in a cultural context? That ended up being something like the Data Ethics Canvas, which again came out of a desire not to create a prescriptive set of rules to follow or a kind of wishy set of principles. Instead, what we kind of came to was essentially a map to help people surface many different kinds of concerns that could give rise to ethical issues for anyone working on data-related projects. Which then kind of bled back into Australia. When I came back to Australia, we weren't really talking about data ethics, AI ethics at the time. over the kind of Christmas in 2017, as we started to see the first tranche of letters in relation to the kind of automation of debt recovery, I wrote a kind of blog that ended up being picked up by the Centre for Ethics and then kind of became an ABC Big Ideas program and then the book. So I've kind of ended up talking about ethics in a variety of contexts. And it's fair to say, if I gave you a very, very quick whistle-stop tour of some of the public issues, debates that have preoccupied people in the mainstream media and in computer science, philosophy, sociology over the last couple of years, there's been some pretty glaring ones. I'm sure some of you in the room perhaps followed Gator when that was in the news 2 years ago or a year ago. It was academics at Stanford who alleged that they had created a system that would identify whether a person was gay or straight. It doesn't. To just put that straight out on the table, you can read about it in Made by Humans, but it was an example of an application that was built using people's online dating profiles. There was a number of assumptions built into the design of the system. Essentially, it's academics saying, we think sexual orientation can be inferred from face, which is itself a kind of assumption to make. And you could look at this as an example. It really ignited a debate around purpose or intent. The authors said they were trying to demonstrate kind of how easy it was to do, how easy it was to build a bomb. But my immediate thought when I saw it was, why do you want to know in the first place? Like, what business is it of anyone's but a person to tell you when they're ready to what their sexual orientation is? So that was an example that I classify as kind of, it raised ethical issues both in terms of just the shoddy design of the system, but also kind of the intent in designing it in the first place. We also had big stories around bias in the outcomes of automated systems. This was Compass, the algorithm used to identify defendants in the US who are most likely to reoffend, which over-predicted on African American defendants reoffending and under-predicted on white defendants. There's also been a range of online debates, papers, discussions around the ethics of using publicly available information, and I think we've seen a real swing over the last couple of years from, if someone's put it out there, it's okay for you to use for any purpose, to realising that the spaces that we occupy online are quite mediated. Just because you've put something on social media does not mean, for example, that a parent who's uploaded a video of their autistic child then really wants it to be included in a study by a bunch of computer scientists without their consent. One that was recently kind of uncovered by the New York Times in June was around home videos of children put up by their parents where they might be in a bathing suit, then being turned into part of YouTube's recommendation algorithms directing towards more sexualized content. So we're starting to move away from, just because it's online, anything else that happens after that is fair game, to wait a second, how do we mediate consent? What is ethical? What is appropriate? What should we be taking responsibility for? We've also had discussions around facial recognition technology. I'm not going to talk about it very much. I'm sure Niels will talk about it a little bit. He's actually just grimaced at me. So whoops, we're going to have to do another 10 minutes on facial recognition. But this is just an example where we know we're increasingly discussing when and where facial recognition technology should be used, but also as researchers having to ask ourselves how we might feel if a system that we have designed for potentially beneficial purposes can also be used for harmful purposes as well. So in this example, we know that facial recognition technology is being used to identify ethnic minorities in China and place them in internment camps. And the reason I get a bit uncomfortable talking about ethics is because I don't know that I can be trusted to make ethical decisions. And frankly, I don't know that I would trust anyone to make ethical decisions, because we all think we're making ethical decisions all the time. In fact, I'm not sure if you looked at John Perry Barlow's The Declaration of the Independence of Cyberspace back in the 90s. This was a huge part of the early web. The first line is, "Governments, you have no sovereignty where we gather. You weary giants of flesh and steel, leave us alone. Our land is cyberspace. But he proposed an ethical framework for the web, which was the golden rule, do unto others as you would want done to you. And for a while it seemed like we'd created an ethical framework for the web, but I think we can kind of reflect on the fact today that just trying to embed kind of soft ethical values doesn't always work. It's also true that within the profession there have been a lot of people talking about ethics and the importance of context and purpose for a long time. This was Karen Spark-Jones back in 2007. If you don't know her name, she was one of the early pioneers of natural language processing. Her kind of techniques for language processing underpinned the first modern search engines, and she was one of the obituaries last year in the New York Times as one of the kind of forgotten women of STEM who had been resurfaced for a New York Times obituary. So again, like I feel as though the talk about AI ethics now is not because we have been completely devoid of ethics. In fact, when I reflect on this in other contexts, what kind of frightens me sometimes around the language around ethics is when you think you are being ethical, it can be very hard to dissuade you of your moral point of view. I was sitting in a chateau a couple of years ago that I understand was a kind of gilded prison for Nazis during World War II, but that's an entirely different story I can tell you afterwards. But we ended up having this very earnest debate about robots not having rights. And everyone around the table was very clear that, well, they wouldn't have rights because they weren't capable of making complex decisions. They couldn't have rights because they did not feel the same way as humans did. And I remember thinking as I was listening to all this, agreeing with absolutely everything and believing that myself, that we used to say exactly the same thing about women. We used to say the same things about certain cultural minorities. And so even though maybe I'm so in my moral framework, like maybe my iPhone is really sentient and is crying out for a kind of robot rights framework, but that I can be so convinced of the appropriateness of something, as with the image on the right, that you could be so convinced as a medical researcher that the lives of a small number of African American sharecroppers being left to die of syphilis over decades is worth it because you are going to discover and monitor and research how syphilis evolves in humans. You can be convinced that that is the ethical course of action, and it will take decades for this to become an ethical problem. So I'm uneasy about leaving us to ethics. This was just Paul Vixie a couple of months ago saying we hadn't nothing that can't be abused won't be. You know, you can design something and then far into the future it could be used in ways that you couldn't have anticipated. So I prefer talking in terms of concepts like care, trust, responsibility, accountability. I don't really like having discussions with my team, for example, about ethics. Because then it's really hard to turn around to the decision maker and say, well, we have an ethical problem. Usually you need to frame things in terms of budget, law, team, error rates. It's hard to communicate in terms of ethics in a way that is crisp and clear. So I prefer talking around these kinds of concepts. Some of you might be coming along tomorrow where I'll dig a lot more into these. Yolanda, how much time have I got left? How much? Okay, sweet, excellent. I can slow down a little bit. I'm so aware that Niels has to get to the airport after this. Because when I think about ethics, I think about not can I be trusted to just make an ethical decision, but can people trust the decisions that I make? Can they trust that I have been responsible? Can they trust that I have taken due consideration of the errors that my system might create? But something that I've just realised is I keep using the word system and not artificial intelligence in this presentation, and it's because quite often at the moment I find when we talk about AI, we're really just talking about automated systems that are making predictions or decisions that perhaps previously a human made. And sometimes it's using deep learning and neural nets, and sometimes it's just a 10-step formula in an Excel spreadsheet. So rather than make everything sound spooky and incomprehensible, because I find quite often when we use words like algorithm or AI, we immediately think we'll need a PhD to unpick how something works. I just say automated system because it could be as simple as a formula that still nobody's quite figured out where the formula came from, but in an Excel spreadsheet somewhere. So what I would like us to start talking about, perhaps beyond ethics, are these kinds of concepts. And I talked to Yolanda about perhaps having 3 questions to noodle on over the course of the night. Questions that I'm noodling on in research at the moment. I'm aware that, for example, in Made by Humans, even though it's quite often advertised as a book about ethics, I spend most of the time saying how uncomfortable I am with that and then asking these questions and still not answering them. But I think this is what we're starting to talk about as a profession, as an industry. It's like, what is our duty of care? It used to be, I think, 5 to 10 years ago, that the attitude was, if you want to know what we're doing, you have to learn to program, essentially. And I used to be guilty of that as well. We used to talk about teaching politicians to code, or having every student in the classroom learn engineering. If you want to understand what we do, you should do it. And it's actually wild because no other industry can operate like that. You can't talk to your doctor and your doctor can say, sorry, if you want to ask me a question, you need to go and do a medical degree. We've been able to essentially, I think, duck responsibility, duck accountability for a while by saying, you know what, you have to understand it. And instead, I think our duty of care will start to expand to include concepts like, well, how do we communicate it? I'm interested in when something is trustworthy, not necessarily in computer science, but when do we as citizens, when do we as decision makers consider a system trustworthy? Your pill packet, when you get a bottle of pills and you're about to take them, what indicators tell you that someone has looked at it, that it is safe, that I can take it and I understand the side effects? These are the kinds of things that I think we're starting to talk about in the context of AI to prevent some of those damaging consequences, errors, problems, bias that have kind of hit the mainstream so far. And finally, kind of where do we draw lines? What are our red lines as an industry? It's very easy to talk about red lines in other industries, like, you know, we can't light fires in Australia 6 months of the year because the danger, bushfire threat is so high that you just can't do it. Can't go on an international flight anymore with over 100 mils of liquid because we've gone, nah, red line, small risk, massive consequences, you're just not allowed to go there anymore. I'm really interested in automated systems, what kinds of red lines we would start to adopt. One that springs to mind at the moment in the context of the YouTube recommendation algorithm that I spoke about earlier, starting to package up home videos of children as part of increasingly sexualized content, is a red line seizing automated recommendations on YouTube content, certain kinds of content. Like, there must be lines that we decide we will not cross. And I'm ultimately optimistic that we will end up having a mature conversation about care, responsibility and accountability in AI because we've done this in other industries. I fell into an internet hole a couple of weeks ago looking at the way cultural norms changed in the medical profession. And this one really interested me because up until the 1970s and 80s, it was actually quite common for doctors not to tell patients that they were dying. The kind of prevailing norm was they don't want to know. So if you knew that your patient had cancer and it was terminal, you could choose not to tell them. Obviously, it turned out patients would actually like to know. There was a series of kind of scandals and discussions, and ultimately doctors had to be taught how to communicate in different ways with patients. And Spike is one of the most widely used models for communicating bad news to patients. And little tools, techniques exist like this throughout the medical profession in response to what was 100 years of changing attitudes to the sovereignty and autonomy of patients. And I think the next 50 years, hopefully not 100, 50 years in computer science will be us changing our relationship to the humans that our systems interact with. So thank you. And I look forward to the panel.
Thanks, Ellen. You've definitely raised some interesting questions for us to all noodle over for the rest of not just the rest of the night, but yeah, that's a start. Our next speaker is Dr. Niels Wouters. Yes, he told me how to say his last name. Is a modern-day techno-renaissance man who works in areas such as human-computer interaction, social computing, art science, and media architecture. I'm not sure what any of those mean. He is Head of Research and Emerging Practice for the Science Gallery Melbourne and Research Fellow in the Interaction Design Lab at the University of Melbourne. Here, he promotes the collision of art and science as a mechanism to expose the breadth of STEM. Please join me in welcoming Niels Wouters.
Thanks, everyone, and good evening. Give me 10, maybe 15 seconds to just switch computers. And maybe just as a teaser, I brought a pretty controversial demo with me, or a demo of a pretty controversial AI, thank you. And I'll need a volunteer for that. Is there anyone whose birthday is today? No one? Oh dear. Tomorrow? Do you want to come up on stage and have your face scanned by a facial? No, right. I'm not selling this well, am I? Wait, what's tomorrow? It's Friday. Is anyone's birthday on Saturday? And who's a volunteer to have a face scan? Anyway, who's a fan to have his face or her face scanned? Do you want to come up on stage in about a minute or 5? I'll call you. Thank you. Not sure what's happening with my laptop. Oh dear. It must have. That's all right. I can also do it without slides to some extent while my laptop is coming back to life. It's National Science Week, and before we get started, I do want to remind everyone that our First Nations in Australia are actually our first scientists, and I think we need to recognize that as well. They have innovated for centuries before us Westerners arrived here. As a supporter of Science Gallery Melbourne, I think that's a really important story to tell and to remind everyone of that. And in saying that, I do acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are gathered tonight. My laptop has been hacked, who knows? I think it's coming back to life. No, it isn't. No. Just try and let's give it a minute.
How do we get this
Get
back on
started.
screen? We get this back on screen.
I'll do your AV, you toss it.
Thank you. All right. I'll keep going while my laptop is trying to find its energy again. That's not my laptop, but thank you. Ellen already mentioned it, so indeed a year or maybe 2 years ago we saw all of these news articles appear online where scientists tried to experiment with new forms of artificial intelligence. They basically gained access to data sets of large images, uploaded them to some sort of machine learning model, and all of a sudden turned that into an interactive model to indeed detect whether you are heterosexual or homosexual. That was really quite shocking, the fact that researchers felt, the need to even do that, the fact that researchers thought that that was actually useful for society to do things like that. And with that in mind, we set out on a bit of a mission to do something similar, to knowingly do something really controversial, develop an AI that basically can scan people's faces and make all sorts of readings or biometric readings of people's faces, but show that in a public space. The reason for that was really that we wanted to start a public conversation about why people do this, but also what people think of when all of a sudden an AI makes a sort of assumption about you. This is really unfortunate. My laptop has decided to give up today. I'm going to come back in a couple of minutes after more. Is there another power plug somewhere? I'm plugging elsewhere.
Technical difficulties. We have AI, but we can't fix these kinds of problems. Okay. Dr. Morvared is an assistant professor and lecturer in the Laboratory for Dialogue Research at Monash University. She won the prestigious Israeli Association for Artificial Intelligence Outstanding Dissertation Award for her thesis at Bar Ilan University. In her previous role as a researcher, as research fellow at Melbourne University, her research was focused on human-centered explainable AI, which you'll hear more about tonight. She's also a champion of using AI for social good. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Morvared.
Hi everyone, super excited to be here. I'll start with a short introduction about me. So I'm actually very multidisciplinary in my approach to life and to research. My bachelor's degree was in biology, and when I did my PhD, I was targeting human intention recognition using artificial intelligence. And then when I got to Melbourne Uni, I was very fortunate to work with Tim Miller and to work about explainable AI. And now I want to talk a little bit about human-centered explainable AI and why we need it. So what is explainable AI? So there are lots of kind of broad definitions. In essence, basically it means when we want to convey some information about the internal reasoning process of some AI algorithm or autonomous system. And we want to do this so that we can kind of predict or explain the outcome. So explainable AI has been actually around for a while, since the 70s. It's now gained a lot of attention because of the increase in big data and the increase in machine learning and deep learning algorithms. So basically, to talk a little bit further about explainable AI, I just want to make sure that we're all on board with what a black box means. So black box concept in machine learning basically means that you have this algorithm, let's say deep learning algorithm, and you know what goes in, and then it does all this stuff. And then you know what comes out. But you don't necessarily know why you got that output. Usually it's used for classification purposes. So for example, consider you have all these images of cats, and you're training your network, and it's called deep not because it's so deep, but because there's lots of levels of processing where it's learning in its own way what a cat is, and the next time you give it a picture, it'll be able to tell you cat. Yes, no. But why? Why is it a cat? Why isn't it a cat? So can it actually determine that there are whiskers, or that it's cute and cuddly, or that it's kind of lazy? Depends if you're a cat lover or not. So that is why we need explainable AI. Originally, in the 70s, it was used for domain experts to be able to explain what's behind their algorithms and how to make them better. But now we're focusing on a human-centered approach. We want to explain something else. So I'd like to talk a little bit more in depth about the compass example that Ellen had raised. And I'd like to put a face on it, because I think a face helps to see the depth of the problem. So this is a real case. In 2013, Eric Loomis, he was accused of driving a car that had been used in a shooting. So he pleaded guilty to evading an officer and no contest to operating a vehicle without the owner's consent. And the judge based his sentence on the compass score. So compass is a correctional offender management profiling for alternative sanctions by the North Point company. So it's an external algorithm. And the judges were actually allowed, and it's even legislated, that they can use this score to impact their decision. And it was decided that Eric Loomis would not get early parole and would go back to prison. Now, when faced with this decision in court, he could put up no defense. Why? Because the COMPAS algorithm is the intellectual property of the Northwest Company. So they're not telling us what's happening in there, and they're not exactly telling us why it has a high likelihood of reoffending. So basically it's, well, this algorithm said no, you have to go to jail. And he cannot put up any defense. There have been allegations later that correlate a higher tendency of reoffending with race and targeting African American defendants. And this is not because the programmers were biased, but our data is biased. People are biased. We have more information about African American defendants. So naturally, the algorithm correlated this with a higher likelihood of reoffending. But let's all not think, oh, these Americans, they're so terrible. Who's familiar with robo-debt? So whoever is not familiar, it's an automated AI-generated system which enforces debt management. Basically what it did is it calculated if someone had an existing debt and then issued out some kind of debt notice to that person. So many people got notices from robodebt that they owed some money. And then, you know, as good citizens, they sought to pay off that debt as soon as possible. Later, it transpired that there was a bug in the system, and it is actually good to call it an autonomous system because that's exactly what it is. The bug was very simple, actually. It calculated the whole income and then averaged it retrospectively over a 2 weeks period, which was not necessarily the best way to go. And while this is easily fixable, if you're issued a debt and you're not necessarily explained why you're issued that debt, you might seek to pay it off. So there have been lots of allegations that the repercussions of these systems have been very bad. It targeted especially people who were kind of in weaker states in society where they didn't have steady income. So people are still looking into the aftermath of these effects, but there was a big mistake in that process. So should we stop using these algorithms? Well, I don't think so. And not only because I like my job. I think that with the life expectancy continually increasing, right, and more people are in need of maintaining certain social lifestyles as well as medical and health situations, we need to be able to utilize the great power in AI to keep up our quality of life. So what should we do? So there are lots of things we should do, legislation talking about ethical AI, but I think that transparency and explainable AI could be part of the answer. Because even if we have these algorithms, which are making horrible mistakes, but they're explaining themselves, and they're saying why these mistakes happened, perhaps we can actually detect the mistakes earlier on, and they won't have such dire implications. So consider the case of Eric Loomis. If the algorithm said, you know, the main reason that I predict, the main feature that I predict this person reoffending is race or skin color, well, we can call bias immediately. For example, in robodebt, if you would get a clear explanation of how it was calculated, then maybe you'd see, okay, this is not relevant for me. Mine should have been calculated differently. So making it transparent is one step towards a solution. But still, I don't think it's enough. I think we need to have human-centered explanations. So a human-centered explainable AI, it's a multidisciplinary approach which contends that these explanations need to be consumed by people. So we need to understand how people work and how people understand and what kind of explanations people are more inclined to accept and what kind of explanations would incur trust. So that means we need to learn not only from artificial intelligence and computer science, but also from neuroscience, psychology, anthropology. And I'll give an example. Consider, for example, what we know from the social sciences about trigger causes versus enabling causes. So What are trigger causes? Let's say we have a house which has, there was a fire and the house is burnt down. So a trigger cause would be the immediate cause that pops to mind, a match hitting a pile of newspapers. But that is not necessarily the best cause to address. So an enabling cause would be actually there being oxygen in the room. And that is the cause that the firemen address when they attempt to put out the fire, right? They spray it with some kind of foam to attempt to eliminate the existence of the oxygen. Another example would be considering contrastive explanations. So humans understand best by having a contrastive explanation. We're not just going to tell you, take this route. We're going to tell you, take this route because it's faster than other routes, or because it's safer. So you need to understand why this as opposed to other things. So I'd like to give an example how a human-centered explanation differs from a non-human-centered explanation. Okay, so consider the following hypothetical example. Okay, we have a deep learning network which has been trained to predict the risk level of a person developing lung cancer. Okay, this is hypothetical. So it has data from an international database of people's electronic medical records, their demographic information, which would include their age, where they live, their socioeconomic status, their lifestyle. And it also has domain expert knowledge of the doctors that are saying what is likely to affect cancer or not. And then the output would be a higher likelihood of developing lung cancer. So consider this example. We have a man who's 55 from Norway, and we put all his data in, and the algorithm says, wow, this person has an 85% chance of developing lung cancer. Okay, so what? Why? What can we do with that without an explanation? Can we assist it in any way? Can we prevent it? Well, not necessarily. So let's look at an explanation from an explainable AI perspective. Okay, so what we have found is that the leading feature which is responsible for this likelihood is Norway. This person lives in Norway, hence they have a high likelihood of developing lung cancer. That doesn't help us very much, does it? Well, in most cases, they probably won't be able to move that easily. And first of all, why? That doesn't make any sense to me. Why should I trust this? So let's look at it from a human-centered perspective. So a human-centered explanation would say, okay, so not only what is the trigger cause, but also what's the enabling cause. And the enabling cause would be, okay, Norway, naturally a colder climate, people tend to go to pubs more often, right? They like to heat up by drinking some booze. So usually when you're going to a pub and you're drinking alcohol, you are exposed in some way or other to secondhand smoke, or maybe even you're more likely to smoke. And we know from the domain expert knowledge that cigarette smoking has a highly correlated with lung cancer. So if people were given this explanation, they not only understand and trust the result, but they can now actually do something about that. So that's a wrap. And please welcome Niels with a very cool demo.
So that was a close call, and also I just received a notification that Niels' flight was delayed 20 minutes, so luck is on our side tonight. Yes. Yeah, really.
Hi again. Isn't it fantastic? We're talking about AI and we still rely on these guys for everything. We're almost there. Do I still have my volunteer here? Yeah? Awesome. Cool. So we got power, we got a volunteer. We almost have slides. We have slides. All right, great. I have a tendency to roam, so if you can't hear me, just yell, throw bottles, phones, everything works. Oh dear. imagine that I tell you how irresponsible you are, how aggressive you look, how, I might not add the attractiveness in this example, but how weird or how emotionally unstable you look. I probably wouldn't fly back to Melbourne tonight with a lot of new friends. And that's indeed something that, as a society, that's something we shouldn't accept. Oh, thanks so much. That's indeed something we shouldn't accept. And like I said before, and as Alan said as well, a lot of the examples that we've seen in the media and in academia from the past couple of years, they're pretty shocking how some researchers and how industry sometimes is exploring new ways to use AI. I'm quite happy that some of these headlines haven't come up in previous presentations, but a lot of you might be aware of the company called Faceception. Apparently they can tell if you're a terrorist just by analyzing your face. It's not just terrorists, they can also analyze if you're an academic, a poker player, and a pedophile. I wonder what happens if you're a poker player and an academic at the same time. The system probably just, explodes. Also, as Alan already highlighted, there's quite a bit of discussion around the Chinese social credit system. Initially, or for a long time, I think we all thought that it was restricted to things and innovations in China, but then a recent Four Corners report, I think from a month ago, shows that it's really, really close to home. And I'm quite vocal about things like that because I think it's really disgraceful how academics are involved in that kind of research. And can I just say that it's not accidental that academics from an Australian university are involved in this and are actually actively developing algorithms to separate ethnic minorities. And then you stumble upon headlines like these. I think this is a TechCrunch article from a year and a half ago. Smart cities, we all love them, everyone buys the technology, and it's indeed something that's really promising. But what happens if one of those databases suddenly becomes publicly accessible? And apparently there's a real need in smart cities to assess people's attractiveness, because this database that was exposed about a year ago contained an attractiveness score for every single person that was captured on a camera. Interesting. Now, I'm also not an ethicist, even though I do like talking about ethics and values. I'm surprisingly an architect, not systems or a software architect, but an architect that designs places like these, I suppose. And I believe really strongly in the value of field studies. I've done a PhD in human-computer interaction. I've looked at how people interact with technology, how it stimulates social interaction, or how it discourages social interaction, and what we can do about that from an architectural and urban planning point of view. So I really believe in field studies, connecting with people, talking to people, looking at how they respond when all of a sudden a technology is put in front of them, and if a technology changes their life or changes their interactions with each other. I'm not a big fan of lab studies. I think outcomes from lab studies, especially in the human-computer interaction world, they're often, colored. They often fail to really provide ecological validity. So like I said before, when in trial one of my presentation, we set out on a bit of a mission to develop a really thought-provoking AI and deploy that as a field study to look at how people would respond when all of a sudden an artificial intelligence or an algorithm, or whatever you want to call it really, for that matter, how that would assess them and how it would display that in public space. Now, where's my volunteer? Can you come up on stage? Good to meet you, Jacob. Give me 1 second to get this running. As you see, this is highly, very strong, powerful software. It's written in Java. I know, right? If you can just stand in front of my webcam so your face appears in that square. I still have to ask it. Are you happy for an AI to analyze your face? Yes. All right.
Yes, I am.
Great. Did everyone record that? I mean, I'm an employee of the University of Melbourne. I have to abide by strong ethical rules, and I guess as we all would. Let me just find my mouse cursor. All right. So what the system does now, it's taking a photo of Jacob and it's sending that to our artificial intelligence model. And as you see, it's making some seemingly correct assumptions. 42? Well, you don't have to answer that question. Hispanic, all right, okay. So it's making all sorts of assumptions. Low commonness, okay, so you have a very unique face. You're a very responsible person, which I really appreciate. Okay. So yeah, it's making all of these assumptions. These are not random data points. These are actually data points that are collected from our model that's currently residing in the cloud somewhere. We have around 2,000 photos that feed into that model. And then all of a sudden, and that's really the core message of this spectacle, really, we wanted people to read what a potential consequence of such data would be. So you're seemingly quite unstable. Did anyone text that to a health professional? I'm sure there are a few, maybe even in the audience, to offer you counseling. All right, okay, great. You can take care of yourself. Great, thank you. And that's really what we wanted people to start talking about. What if algorithms start to make decisions for us? I think a lot of us are familiar with artificial intelligence. A lot of us are familiar with values, with ethics, with programming, with algorithms. We kind of know that algorithms can indeed make decisions for us and have consequences for us. But a lot of the public, a lot of members of the public don't know that. There's a lot of people on the street that know that algorithms exist. We all have a bank card. We all get these annoying messages on an ATM machine that says we're out of credit or out of funds. So everyone knows that there's an algorithm, but more and more algorithms have consequences for our personal lives. So we really wanted to develop this for people to start talking about. I might thank you. You might go and sit down. You were just my guinea pig. Thanks, Jacob. So we really wanted to have a conversation starter for people to understand this. We ran this for quite a while on campus, so at the University of Melbourne. Let me go back to my slides for you. Did everyone take a photo of Jacob's profile? Jacob, are you happy for people to share that on social? It's probably too late anyway. I'm just trying to find my mouse cursor. There we go. So yeah, we ran this on campus for a couple of months. We had about 8,000 people come through. We collected a lot of data as well back then in the days. We took photos of people as they stood in front of the camera. We took photos as a new data point appeared on the screen. Because initially we thought, oh, let's analyze how people's emotion changes as these attributes become a lot more personal. In the end, we just got rid of all the data because it wasn't really crisp and clear enough. And also we felt ethically really conflicted by collecting data. The system also had a lot of extra bells and whistles. It was controlled via hand gestures because we really wanted to create an interface that was a bit creepy and spooky. Now, I won't focus too much on the findings of the research. If you're keen to read up on them, head over to biometricmirror.com. There's a publication that we recently presented at the conference on designing interactive systems about what the learnings were. Maybe one that I can give you just as a bit of a teaser. We obviously had a lot of young people stand in front of Biometric Mirror, students on campus. And you'd be surprised when we did interviews with them afterwards how many people walked away and said, you know what, it must be right, because it's a computer that's making that judgment and making that assessment. It's a computer that's telling me that I'm an irresponsible, non-attractive, weird person. And I think that was really shocking, and I think that shows the importance today of events and initiatives like these to contribute to education. I think a lot of young people have become desensitized from this concept of data. We generate millions, billions of data points probably per day. And I think it's really important that young people remain conscious that every single data point can contain information about you that is potentially harmful at some point in your life. But a lot of the people that What stood out for us is this idea of what we now call ethics probes. Some of you might work in the human-computer interaction field and are probably familiar with concepts such as technology probes and cultural probes. Basically, they all consist of small-scale demonstrators that you give to people, the public. You let them interact with it, and you use it as a tool to collect information about their experience with, say, a new technology. Ethics probes are not very different from them. The only added value of them is that they are specifically designed to start a discussion around values, expectations, morals, ethics, if you want. They're quite provocative in nature. I mean, Biometric Mirror is clearly not a very friendly machine, not a machine that you want to stand in front of on a Monday morning and feel happy for the rest of the week. And it needs that provocation. A lot of people need indeed provocative things these days to start a discussion and a really meaningful discussion. What we also think is really essential for ethics probes is to deploy them in a relevant context of use. As I said before, I believe in lab studies. I believe very strongly in field studies in the wild. It's really relevant for an AI, such as a biometric mirror, to appear in a public space. There's a lot of advertising screens these days, for instance, that have these small cameras on them. In a lot of shopping centers in Australia, there's one particular chain that I won't name tonight, but I've named it in previous presentations, that does live tracking of people that stand and walk in front of that screen or those screens. So they do a gender analysis, they do an age analysis and emotion. There's been an article somewhere where one of those actually crashed and it displayed really clearly who was in front of the screen, so a sort of brief analysis of the person. So that happens on a daily basis. And I'm not saying that a clever or an intelligent advertising screen is harmful per se, but it might show you products that are more expensive because you look wealthy or you look like you're one of those people that can afford a sports car rather than a normal family car or whatever it is. So it does all push ethical boundaries, I think. What ethics probes are really useful for is to uncover public attitudes. As I said before, the public needs to be involved in these discussions. We do need ethicists and academics. I love my job as well, just as Moore does. But we can learn so much from just interacting with members of the public. They might have a very rough idea or assumption or opinion about a technology, but it's probably still a very meaningful one that we should all take along and analyze and see what we can learn for that or from that to inform the development of future technologies. Now, ethics probes are not straightforward. Our machine learning model was trained in probably 4 hours. So we built that with a few thousand photos and a publicly available data set. But we spent several months to go through a development process, but also a sort of reflection process. We were a team of about 8 or 9 researchers, and we didn't just want to run this on a screen on campus. Obviously, we had to apply for ethics review from the university. Surprisingly, that was very quick. So we felt the moral duty to study the ethics of our study ourselves in really good detail. We made sure that people were fully informed before consenting. In your case, Jacob, you were not fully informed, but that's because I run a custom version in this presentation. But people were given an introduction about roughly what to expect, but we didn't give them too much detail either. And to we developed a communication plan around this as well. The university was quite concerned that if things would go wrong, if students would complain, or if the media would misunderstand the project, that might backfire significantly towards the University of Melbourne, which is obviously not ideal. Recently, we've taken Biometric Mirror further. We've taken it out of campus. So together with Lucy McRae, who's a very established Melbourne sci-fi artist, we've taken Biometric Mirror, to Swanston Street in Melbourne, right in the heart of the city, right in front of the State Library. And we let thousands of Melburnians interact with Biometric Mirror. For this particular occasion, we dressed it up as a sort of future beauty salon. And people could get a mathematically perfect facial as well of their face. So we did the biometric analysis that Jacob went through, and based on that analysis, we presented this algorithmically perfect face, and people could actually have a printout with them that they could take home and attach to their walls. Really interesting and really controversial as well, because all of a sudden, you might not see it really clearly on these photos, but these were 65-inch television screens pointing towards Swanston Street. They were active day and night, 24/7 for an entire week. So your photo could actually have ended up there and be looping at night when no one was visiting the installation. And your face was visible in the city with all of your psychometrics on that screen as well. So quite thought-provoking. This was done together with Science Gallery as well, who's got a target audience of 15 to 25-year-olds, especially the 15 to 18-year-olds. That was something that we spent a lot of time on. What can we show? I showed Jacob's attractiveness, but for that particular installation, we decided to get rid of a few of these parameters simply because we thought they were too controversial and too potentially harmful. So what is this all about? I think ethics probes challenge a lot of our ideas and assumptions, and they make about the balance or the imbalance between a lot of things, such as the convenience that we all want from technology, but then obviously the invasiveness, the fact that it's often used to control us rather than, as we all buy Amazon Alexas these days, we think it makes us more free. My advice with Amazon Alexa, just throw them in the sea. Maybe pick them up later. It's pollution, and that's not a great thing either. But just don't buy them. I'm not surprised that there is a backlash against companies listening to your conversations. That's how AI works. It needs human intervention to learn. It should just be communicated more clearly with the public that these things happen. So I added this slide just because it does show why ethics probes, I think, are really useful and why we need to investigate that further whenever there's a new technology that we think is useful. Let's look at the good applications, but let's also not neglect the potential misuse of that technology and just challenge that, show that in public space, let people interact with it and learn from their findings. Where do I see ethics probes go next? And some of these things are currently in the works. Obviously, deepfakes. I think we haven't yet seen the worst of where deepfakes can take us. I saw a video, I think this morning, of a comedian in one of the American breakfast shows whose face live transformed in the faces of the actors that he was actually mimicking. It's a beautiful video. It's a beautiful technology in itself as well, deepfakes. But it is just potentially so harmful. So imagine a biometric mirror that just films you and all of a sudden it makes you say something that you haven't said, but that is very controversial. Obviously location tracking, and then, I guess my pet peeve, the smart speakers. What if your smart speakers start to live a life of their own and suddenly they don't want to set a reminder because they think you should by now remember to leave for the airport on time, for instance, to catch your plane. I think I basically said everything I wanted about ethics probe. I think it's a really interesting avenue. I do want to point everyone to this new Al Jazeera miniseries. Well, it's currently online as a miniseries. It's called All Hail the Algorithm. It's a beautiful work by Ali Ray, who has actually visited us in Melbourne and went through the biometric mirror with Science Gallery, where she talks about the new innovations where algorithms are going to take us. It is a bit of a Black Mirror-esque approach, but it's also a pretty positive approach. So it's currently online as a mini-series, but from the 9th of September, they'll start publishing feature-length episodes about where algorithms and AI and machine learning will take us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Niels and Moore, who were rolling with the punches there with our technical difficulties. We were actually concerned that the live stream would be the issue, but it turns out it was the power adapter underneath the desk. It wasn't charging power. All right, so now it is time for our panel discussion. While we get the panel set up, let me introduce you to our panel facilitator, Dr. Andy Stapleton. He's an award-winning science communicator and director and founder of Verbalize.science. We will have Ellen and Moore joining us, as well as Terry Sweeney, the managing director of IBM Watson Health, and Daniel Kiley, who works at the intersection of law and technology. Please welcome our panelists.
All right, excellent. I'm on. Where am I sitting? Down here. So I thought I had questions, and now I'm more confused than ever. I'm slightly scared, and I think maybe that's because of the uncertainty of where this is going. And you know, when I was speaking to my friends, I was like, "Oh, I'm moderating a panel on artificial intelligence." I was like, "What do you think?" They were like, "It's a bit scary, isn't it?" I was like, "Yeah, it's a bit scary. Why? Why is it scary?" They said, "Oh, they're coming to take our jobs." I was like, "Great. What else?" "Yeah, robots. Great." One of friends was really excited because he thought he'd get himself an AI robo sex doll, which, fingers crossed. Now, there's a few people here that we haven't met yet. So obviously, with our keynote speaker, Ellen, we've got Moore, who also spoke. And what I've asked them to do is just you get a sense of who they are as people and not academics, is they're going to tell you 2 things about themselves, and you have to guess which one's the real one and which one's the fake. So now you become the artificial intelligence. This is going to be great fun. So Ellen, what are your 2 things?
So you can choose. I was an extra in the Joe Citadel scene in Mad Max Fury Road, or I played drums in a dream-themed all-girl punk band.
All right, so number 1, raise your hand if you think that's the fake. Ish, all right. Raise your hand if you think 2 is the fake. Oh my God, okay, overwhelmingly 2. Which one's the fake?
First was the fake. Do I not look like a drummer? Thank you.
Fantastic. And now, next, obviously, we've met Moore. But Moore, your 2 things, please.
Okay. Off. Okay. No. Okay. No worries. 1, I have 6 children. And 2, I used to work in a tattoo parlor.
Okay, raise your hand if you think the first one is the fake. Okay, and raise your hand if you think the second one is the fake. Oh, it's pretty even split-ish. Which one is the fake?
The first one.
That's excellent.
I told you I'm interdisciplinary.
Now, 2 people that we haven't met yet. Daniel, do you say Kiley or Kiley? Kiley, perfect. Daniel Kiley is a senior associate in HWL. What's that bit mean?
It used to stand for something. It doesn't anymore. HWL, Ebsworth Lawyers.
All right, perfect, good. I saw an acronym. I was like, what the hell does that mean? Okay, Daniel has got a focus on intellectual property, technology, and privacy, and you've been named a national rising star in intellectual property, technology, media, and telecommunications law. So soon, you will not be able to look directly at him without a filter. So make the most of it right now. Daniel, your 2 things, please.
Well, a tiny intro that's all true. I've been working for the last 9 years as a commercial lawyer, but I've moonlighted a little bit as a software developer on the side, and I have released some of my own apps. So the 2 things I'll give you to pick from is I've had an app knocked back by Apple from the App Store because it was giving legal advice and they said that that wasn't appropriate. Or I've had an app knocked back by Apple from the App Store because they said, because you could use it to search for pornography and they said that wasn't appropriate.
Okay, good. So raise your hand if you think the first is the fake. And raise your hand if you think the second is the fake. All right, so second one looks like it's just got it, and the fake?
No, the second one's true. So it was an Instagram client for the Apple TV, and you'd type in a hashtag, and it would show you the most recent photos with that hashtag, and they kept typing rude things into it, and then sending me back screenshots of what they found and saying, "See, this is unacceptable." So.
Very good.
Anyway.
Very good. And our last panelist for tonight, ladies and gentlemen, Terry Sweeney, who's the Managing Director of IBM Watson Health, recognized as a thought leader. What does that mean?
I have no idea, but it sounds really good.
It does sound really good, doesn't it? Healthcare in innovation and technology, 2 startups have been acquired. Now, so I own Verbalized, or founded Verbalized.science. Do you want to buy my startup from me? That's a yes. We've got it on camera. And also, Terry was honored by Her Royal Highness, Queen Elizabeth II, with a CMG. What's a CMG?
Apparently, it's the same award that James Bond had in Skyfall. So
are you James Bond? Is that what you're telling me?
Possibly. I'd have to kill you if I told you.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Now, the one thing I'm always... So I did Picture Palace earlier this year, and I met Prince Andrew. He smelled amazing. Rich people and royalty just smell so lovely. Did you get a chance to smell the Queen?
I did one better. I got a good chance to smell Prince Philip.
Nice. Oh, I don't want to know what he smells like. He smells like old ballsack, definitely. And your 2 things, please.
Okay, I represented England in cycling at 2 Commonwealth Games, is number 1. And number 2, I had a number 1 hit in Ireland when I was in a punk band in the late 80s.
Oh my God. Okay, raise your hand if you think the first is the fake. And raise your hand if you think the second is the fake. All right, second slightly has it, I think.
Okay, I did represent England in cycling in Vancouver in 94 and in Auckland in 90.
Yeah.
And I had a number 5 hit in a punk band.
Oh. Excellent, well done. Ladies and gentlemen, if you please, round of applause and welcome our panel. So, like I said, I thought I knew all about this stuff. I've got some artificial intelligence stuff for Verbalized.science. It is a little bit of a black box. I put some stuff in, I get some stuff back. Excellent. The word on the street, though, is that AI is dangerous, it's scary, and it's coming for you and your job. Now, Ellen, maybe we'll start with you. When you, in this arena, it's nice because these people look lovely. You are attractive, by the way, despite what AI says. You're in the top 20%, I reckon, in the room. So, with those cute dimples, look at those. Keep smiling, mate. Anyway, so in a lovely room like this, you know, we're open to AI and how it can change our lives for the better. But imagine you're in a pub in outback New South Wales, and they say AI and ethics, it's just coming for my job, innit? What would you say to these people?
Actually, I think it's working now. It is working. Yes, I turned it on. Okay, rural New South Wales, it's coming for your job. In certain contexts, I'd be saying you have to think about other jobs, but also we need to change the way our attitudes towards certain jobs. So I do, just speaking about jobs specifically, there are a few different things that I think are interesting to reflect on in the AI context. One is the amount of insecure casual jobs that are rising as part of the delivery of automated systems. So content moderation, voice transcription is the new one just this week, that there is thousands of people transcribing the voices on your Google Home so that it can be kind of confirmed and verified against the automated system. You have Airtasker, Deliveroo, Uber. We have this kind of growing economy of insecure, low-paid, the bits in the machine that the machine can't do yet. And I do get concerned about how those jobs are increasingly taken up by people in rural, remote areas, people without access to other kinds of employment. That's not sufficient labour for you to live on. It's not meaningful. It doesn't give you surety of the employment you'll have going forward. So in that context, I'm like, well, how do we find more meaningful and useful jobs, interesting jobs? How do we give people security in the jobs that they have? I also, though, do think that we need to change our attitudes to the jobs that do exist in society. So there was a really great Jill Lepore New Yorker article about automation of jobs, but actually, for example, even though men in their 50s to 65 were the fastest growing group of unemployed workers in response to automation, automated factories, automated trucks. They were also least likely to want to go into jobs that were historically seen as feminine, so caring roles, nurses, aged care facilities. How do you change people's perceptions of the value of work so they feel that they can shift industry without it being seen as a challenge to your masculinity, for example?
Sure. So they are coming for their jobs.
I'd say there's going to be new jobs. I'd say we have to embrace different kinds of jobs. But I also think we need to give people protection, particularly in the context of the gig economy. Do you want someone that's worked for the same organisation all their life, then forced to, in their late 50s, early 60s, to drive an Uber, plus be on Airtasker, plus transcribe voice recordings in order to continue to pay off their mortgage? I think we need to talk about kind of incentive structures, taxation, etc. of these companies.
Excellent. And so Terry, we talked about new jobs, and in the health space in particular, AI is, I think perceived as kind of a force for good in general, but also, are there new jobs coming out in health? Is it just device-based? What is happening in that area? Because, we only hear in South Australia, we've got Life Whisperer, and that's all over everything we ever see. Can you just give a little background on, it's clearly a force for good, what else is happening?
Yeah, sure. I think it is a force for good, and particularly in healthcare. And I really like Alan's comments on we're probably not thinking enough about how we retrain, and everyone wants to be a data scientist or a mathematician building algorithms for AI. I think that's only going to go so far, and it will be the sectors like caring for, as we live longer and age. It is those services around that, those human physical services, I think will kind of increase in terms of employment opportunities. So I don't think we're focusing right now on what we should be to make sure that people have jobs in the future. We've done a lot of work about that in IBM, and we think in the next 10 years 100% of jobs will be impacted by AI in some shape or form. In healthcare, I think for us we call it augmented intelligence, to get over the point that, at least for now, we're not building the killer robots, where we're developing tools that augment human intelligence and just do the number crunching, right? So we know that every day we generate 2.5 quintillion bytes of information.
What does that mean in real language?
10 to the power of 17.
Okay, great.
I think over our lifetime we'll generate over 1,100 terabytes of health-related information, and that's growing and growing. And that's not just your electronic medical record and your GP record. It's things like getting information from smart devices like Apple Watches and Fitbits and other devices around IoT.
When someone buys a Fitbit, do you automatically give them the okay to take all of your data as it's sat on you, or how does that even work?
Well, I think it's about, and I'm not sure specifically how it works with Fitbit, but I think it's all about consent, and I always point to my health record in Australia, which I think has been a PR disaster. I think fundamentally, if you're diagnosed with stage 2 colorectal cancer and you're sitting in front of your oncologist, do you want that oncologist to have all of the information available to make the best decision for your health and your treatment program? Of course. No one would argue with that. But I think when it comes to the decision making, the AI, at least what we're doing in healthcare, is to provide a recommendation. And it's trying to change from black box to glass box. So it's an evidence-based. So I think this is the best treatment program for this cancer patient, and this is all of the information I'm basing that on, and that's a suggestion to the human doctor, who might say, well, duh, I kind of knew that already, or, oh, wow, I didn't know about that study in colorectal cancer in Norway that had this impact with this type of treatment, and that's directly relative to the patient that's sitting in front of me. Doctors, we've done some work with McKinsey, and doctors would have to read 127 hours a week just to keep on top of all of the information, which is impossible, absolutely impossible. So we're developing the tools and the machines using AI and machine learning and deep learning to just do that crunching, provide a suggestion, and let the human decide whether to take that on or not.
So using this as a tool that people can decide to ignore or
Absolutely.
accept.
So ultimately, the human's making the decision.
Yeah.
In the end,
I guess that's good then to throw to you more in terms of like, because what looked like the biggest issue obviously is just the communication aspect. You know, we talked about how scary AI seems to be for the general population and non-scientist audience. Now we're talking about, well, we'll use simple language to explain it to them in a way that they understand. But you know, how much more can we do to make sure that the social good is obvious, but does it go far beyond like a communication problem?
Well, so it's interesting because AI has been getting a bad rap. And it's really very amazing. Even now when we're talking about, you know, and this is a problem with, you know, job opportunities for the older generation, we're not mentioning the unbelievable abilities that the younger generation have of creating their own jobs. So they're not even, if you look at what young people are now doing, and these are not necessarily educated, but even teens, what they're doing with the current technology is amazing. They're breaking the boundaries. They're making their own choices. They're making their own jobs. I mean, the #1 star of, I think, in the US has started her label from the basement with her brother when she was 14. So, you know, the advancements in technologies are amazing, and they're enabling us to maintain a quality of life and to, you know, do all these fantastic things, but people are really scared of the killer robots. So, if it's okay, I'd just like to mention a few, you know, things that are being done in AI for social good that are actually happening, and they're really, really inspiring. So, I could give you examples from part of my work at Monash University. We have something called the ILAX Lab. So that's AI for law enforcement and community safety. And one of the projects they're now doing with the Australian Federal Police is they want to help protect the quality of life and the mental states of the officers who have to daily interact with offensive images and in a way classify them, such as child pornography. And these people are at a state where they cannot even see pictures of their kids on the phone. They wear out from the job really, really quickly. And, you know, people are trying to help that. They're trying to use AI tools to do these things that are so harmful for people. We're using AI in the medical domain in a kind of a different aspect. I have a project going with Malaysia where we have cancer patients in Malaysia who are culturally kind of intimidated from interacting with their doctors. I hope not with their daughters, but with their doctors. And what we have an app that not only do they log in their symptoms, but it then also provides them with ways of interacting and suggestions about explanations and actually empowering them, you know, the citizens, the patients, in front of their doctors to better voice and to gain trust. And there are amazing examples of AI being used to combat illegal poaching in Africa, where they can target and they can know where the poachers will set the traps. And this has been proved amazingly successful. And there's been AI work to help the homeless community in the US and to try to educate them and to help them be more tested about HIV. And they're using game theory methods to target the lead members of the homeless community to pass the message on. And it's really, really working. So there's all these amazing, amazing things that are being done.
And that people just aren't hearing about?
Yeah,
or?
They're not hearing about it because it's more interesting to, you know, see the mad robot go crazy.
Well,
so
certainly, I mean, in terms of like the news, people want, like, they're looking for clicks, and it obviously helps their click-through rates if it is sensationalist, amazing news and, you know, killer robots and all that sort of stuff.
You know, but everything that Ellen has brought up is highly relevant. We do have an ethics problem, but it's worth using it and overcoming these problems for the amazing benefits that we get, and we are getting. So society now is better than it was before.
Perfect, and I think so now. Yes.
Well, can I, just because your initial question there was sort of about tying consent to being able to understand what the system is doing. And so at the moment, if you're doing things with people's personal information in Australia, then the Privacy Act has things to say about that. And some things under the Privacy Act require you to have consent. And if you don't actually understand what's happening, can you properly consent to it? And maybe even like the demo that we got earlier, you consented to come up and have your face scanned, but he sort of, did you actually consent to having your attractiveness rated and shown to us? And did you understand how the system's working and what it's actually going to do? In Australia, at least, the requirements around consent under the Privacy Act are actually fairly weak. But that's,
Niels is safe.
But that's one of the, that is one of the, I don't know, we hear that come up as a repeated issue, and most recently the ACCC's digital platforms report that came out last week, that was one of their key, they had a whole bunch of recommendations, but one of them was to really beef up when you need consent and what's good as consent, instead of just saying, well, he didn't say no, or he vaguely understood it, or whatever. It needs to be specific and informed, and people actually understand what's happening.
Excellent. So now that we're on sort of like the legal aspects, people don't like AI. Lawyers don't have the best reputation. When you marry the two, how are you finding this? Do people just go, of course the lawyers want to get involved?
Well, the politicians make the laws, and they don't have the best reputation either. But
so from a legal perspective, is it capable of keeping up with how fast the AI changes?
No, the law is behind. Right now, there isn't a lot of law that talks about AI specifically. But
can you swap out mics? I'm not sure if that one's doing mental.
But AI doesn't exist in a vacuum. It is subject to the ordinary laws of the land. If you've got something that discriminates against a particular race, you could still breach the anti-discrimination legislation. Or if you use personal information as part of your thing, you might need to comply with the Privacy Act. Or if you deploy something that's risky and you've got a duty of care, and you could potentially be on the hook for negligence, like if you gave someone a car that you knew the seatbelts were crap and they had an accident and that caused them injuries. So we don't lose all of that stuff that we've built up over centuries of lawmaking and judicial decisions, but it's still rocketing away from us, and we're trying to analogize from things like car seat belts to these things that are sort of taking us into places where we've never really dealt with before.
I think it's going to work really well between AI and lawyers, because in the next 5 years we won't have human lawyers, it'll all be artificial intelligence.
I'm sure they'll. No.
An almost round of applause. He will sue you. He'll find out who you are and sue every one of you. He's capable of it. So look, that was 20 minutes of us. But the one thing about panel sessions is it's an opportunity for you guys to ask questions. Now we're going to take some from the room here, but also for our streaming audience. If you go onto slido.com and put in the code AICN, you'll be able to ask questions. So we'll try to balance between in the room questions and the stuff that's happening in the magical world of the internet. So, first of all, are there any questions in the room for any of our panelists? Please raise your hand.
Hello, my name's Luke.
Hello, Luke.
Hello. So I wanted to know what the panel's thoughts are on something like the universal basic income to mitigate jobs being disrupted by AI in society.
Oh boy, so the only thoughts I have about universal basic income are we talking about a world within which all you have is universal basic income, irrespective of the condition you find yourself in? So universal basic income works if you assume everyone comes to the world with the same opportunities, and all they're missing is whatever the monetary figure is that we all get. But if you are someone with special needs, limited education, multiple dependents, I get nervous when we talk about UBI without also reflecting on the need for a deeper safety net. So that's my only thoughts.
Yeah, I've actually done some work in the Nordics previously around universal basic income now.
Is that where the Vikings are from, the Nordics?
That's right, that's the one. And,
did you get to wear a hat?
Always.
Good.
Mainly on a Tuesday.
Nice.
So I think, yeah, it's interesting because some of those countries have dabbled with that now, not necessarily as a way to live with artificial intelligence and increased automation. And I think, I guess to answer Luke's question is, do you want to pay higher taxes? Because that's probably going to be one of the only ways that we're going to be able to fund universal basic income in the future. And I think a lot of us would say, well, I like the idea of it, but do I want to pay more now to cater for that in the future? And I think a lot of us would say no. So I think we need to find some innovative funding models to look at that seriously.
In the interest of getting an answer from you, do you want to pay more taxes?
I mean, if it means I get a greater proportion of overall wealth, I would say that is a good idea for the future and for every individual. So
that's very nice of you.
I would say yes.
Yeah, you'll say yes. Well done.
I'll pay for everyone's.
Very good.
Whether or not that's the particular answer, there's potentially an exercise to think about. If we automate away half the required labour in the world, how do we get to a situation where everyone gets to enjoy the benefit and do half as much work instead of half the people having a job and half the people having nothing? Or, it's a big question to answer there. And I don't know we're necessarily the people with the answer to it. But, yeah, I'm very curious about that.
There's a great essay, I think from the 70s. I'm going to use a naughty word on the live stream, which is, it's an essay called The Bullshit Job Generator. And it's about how actually we've talked about forms of universal basic income and automating away terrible work and giving people more leisure time, but we just keep inventing new jobs to fill our time because we're not actually very good with leisure. So it reflected on automation happening since the 1930s and 40s and all of the bullshit jobs that were developed in the 1950s and 60s.
Just to keep us busy.
Yeah, and we created whole industries that...
Bullshit jobs?
That's just the name of the essay.
Yeah, okay. No, that's good.
It's a really good point that Ellen raises about the impact on health, because a lot of studies show that the more leisure time we have, the more detrimental impact it has on our health.
Yeah, I take way more drugs when I'm alone.
Exactly.
Why wouldn't you? Yeah, what we may do is we may go for a question from Slido.
So we have a question from Hobart, an anonymous person, asking, how do we balance protecting the public from crime but protecting people's privacy?
Protect people from crime by protecting people's privacy.
While protecting privacy.
Wow. So that's a whole snake pit right there.
You've got 2 minutes.
So basically, there's a problem, and I think it's very linked to what Niels was talking about with the facial recognition, right? So when we have facial recognition software, for example, in airports to detect perhaps, terrorists or potential threats, this is, again, very in danger of biasing people. And, I know places that utilize these techniques and have actually saved countless lives because of that. And I know places where it's just being used to discriminate. So it's a double-edged sword. And I think what needs to be in place is, again, a clearer model of consent so that you would actually know, for example, in case of biometrics, you would know when you're walking into a place that you're being filmed, and you know exactly. So you know how we have these labels on cigarettes now that you're incurring these risks. These should be made public and transparent to everyone in pretty much the same way. People need to be doctors to read those labels and understand the risks. Same way people don't need to be scientists to understand that they're giving up a certain level of privacy to get a certain service. So I do think we need to think of a way to utilize these, but we need to make them transparent, and we need to get official consent in a way so that you would know what you're getting into.
Perfect. Daniel, from a legal perspective, how does someone give full consent? Is it just good enough to slap a sticker on something and be like, well, no, it's our data?
Yeah, and it tends to be as well that if we're talking about public law enforcement, that they just sort of come in and cut across the top and say, well, we're we're above the regime that applies to businesses and to ordinary government agencies, because we're doing this to keep the nation safe. And I don't know. At the moment, we're almost getting to a point though where you're saying you need to be fully aware that you're being filmed, but is that almost just not an expectation at this point, that you're in public spaces and that's what happens?
I think it isn't. I think people are still, surprised by it because it's so not intuitive and because it's not formally discussed. I mean, all of the things that we've raised here, I think none of us raised anything new, but it's not being discussed enough, and it's not being open, and it's definitely not being made available to the general public.
So what's the next step then? If it's being raised, what is that breakthrough moment? What's that next step that you're like, well, now we're solving it? What does it look like?
I think we're running out of time, aren't we?
We all move to China, where the government owns the data, and then problem solved.
Perfect, there we are, good. We may take another question from in the room. I'm not sure if there was one this side.
Yep.
I feel like this is a bit of like an Alcoholics Anonymous thing. So if you say your name, we'll all say hello and then your name. Ready?
Hi, I'm Sal Humphreys.
Hello,
Hi,
Sal Humphreys.
It's been 13 years since my last drink. I have a question about the commercial value of the AI that is being developed, and the fact that I think that we can all see that there are very distinctive benefits, and in the hands of the right people, those benefits are going to be great for us. But actually, mostly what drives a lot of the innovation seems to be commercial benefit. And why would I trust a commercial, business to actually make an ethical decision when it affects their bottom line? Because I know they won't. And so I would like you to comment, please, on the role of capitalism, let's say, in, sort of gradually eroding our privacy and our rights in all sorts of ways, and how on earth that can actually be constrained.
Is IBM, are they evil?
No comment. I may not have a job in the morning. It's a really interesting point, and sorry that it's been 13 years since your last drink. We can solve that after this session. I think, I work for a large corporate American tech company, and our whole reason for being is to make the shareholders lots and lots of money, right? But I think that's down to the broader picture of that will drive innovation, and in healthcare that will drive benefits for all of us as patients at some stage. It's like the big nasty pharma companies as well. I mean, they're earning billions and billions and billions of dollars, which on the one hand can seem quite obscene, but on the other hand, they're developing drugs that are saving our lives. So I don't necessarily see a problem with a capitalist system developing commercial solutions using artificial intelligence, because I think it's that capitalism that would drive innovation and at least funds the innovation.
Is that what someone who's evil would say, though? I think it
Perhaps.
is. Yeah. Oh, sorry, Ellen. Yes, you want to go?
One of the things that I think it is worth reflecting on is it can feel like something cannot be constrained when you're in a moment where it isn't constrained, and yet, no, I think I have a microphone on. It's not good. I thought I had a booming voice, but not by Adelaide standards. Something can feel as though it's incapable of being constrained until a tipping point when what seemed inescapable suddenly became something that has to be rectified immediately. An example that I just think of this week in a completely separate domain is gun control, where you now have, organisations like Walmart stepping in and saying, well, we're going to unilaterally make decisions about how we sell guns because the public sentiment has clearly changed. And even in the context of how data about us is moving and being used online, 10 years ago, being a privacy advocate was a dirty profession. You were the constantly raining on everyone else's parade. All of the conversations would be about innovation and benefit, and then there'd be a privacy advocate in the back of the room being like, consent? And it wasn't considered of concern, and the language at the time was, like Sun Microsystems, privacy is dead. Mike Zuckerberg saying in 2010, privacy is no longer a social norm. There was this real, it's over. This is the world we live in now. And I think you could really look at now the discussions going on in the US Congress, in UK Parliament, in Australia. I think whether we can actually constrain it using national systems of government is a whole separate question that needs its own discussion. But it's clear that sentiment has changed, and in certain ways, large commercial companies have had to come to the table on just little decision moments. It is no longer sufficient now for Facebook and Google and YouTube to say, we know what we're doing. We don't have to explain how it is that we recommend content for other people to watch. We don't have to explain how it is that we serve up advertisements. They're resisting a lot, but it's quite clear that it's no longer sufficient to just say, leave it to us, we know what we're doing. So I'm optimistic that we are getting to a tipping point where some form of constraint will be possible.
Just raise your eyebrows if you liked that answer. They are down, everybody. They are frowning. We may now take another question from
Can I just very, very quickly, because
lawyer quickly.
Well, that's right. There's gonna have to be a role for law to play, and I think just to combine two of the themes from your presentation, right? One is, where's the line that we don't cross, and that's where the law is going to have a key role of helping make sure that line is something that you can't cross. And then the second part about the transparency is, if you want to do something that's a bit, grubby, then you've got to own it. You have to air your dirty laundry. And maybe that sort of helps the market forces say, well, I'll take my business to someone who's not doing these sorts of things. So there's a role for the law, but we have to hope that there's more than just that as well.
Perfect example is revenge porn. That, just really quickly, that up until relatively...
I've always got time for porn discussions. So.
Well, revenge porn was a really terrible practice on the web for a certain period of time where it was not okay, but mainly boyfriends would upload nude images of women that they had dated or slept with, and the platforms would say, not our responsibility to take it down. So this was happening on every platform, had its own name. There were websites dedicated to revenge porn where you could just upload photos of women that you had since broken up with, or they had scorned you, or whatever, and then they would be out there for everyone to see forever in perpetuity, because as we know, it's very hard to remove things permanently from the web. Ultimately, as social pressure became so intense, the platforms did start using automated tooling to try to identify and reduce and take down instances of revenge porn of their own volition. Now we're looking at laws to also penalise people who are actually uploading images, so the law is stepping in to make it a crime to upload images. But that's an example where the platforms moved from, not our business, we're just a neutral platform.
Doing something about it. Yeah,
yeah.
Right. No, we're going to go this way. But you can answer it. No matter what happens, you're answering it.
Yeah, so just one small note. AICN doesn't think revenge porn is a joke, despite it being an amusing thing here. A combination of a couple of questions, one from Canberra, one from Melbourne. Given the unknown ethics around AI, are we ready for regulation? And in a context where different countries regulate at different rates, do we need to think about international treaties for this type of thing?
I'll give it to you.
Oh, what? I thought you wanted to answer this question. No. So we have in other domains created international norms, standards, treaties to govern certain kinds of behaviours. I mean, you could look at other industries like aviation, which has come to the table on a whole ecosystem of international standards, expectations, incident responses, layers of regulation. That is an example of kind of something that is international in nature. I think the thing that you just have to accept, and I think you would agree with me on, is like regulation is not going to be perfect. There are always going to be things that you haven't thought of yet, ways in which you can flout the law.
You have to pay lawyers for each one of those things. So you're in, mate. Don't worry. You can get some nice new socks.
But what I find quite striking, and where I think an international treaty or forms of international cooperation become essential, is at the peak of the Cambridge Analytica scandal, Facebook could choose not to appear before certain national parliaments. So they turned down invitations to appear before the UK Parliament when a coalition of countries, the UK, Canada, Australia, there was about 3 other countries, joined forces to demand that they appear. They could still say no. And that tells you a lot about kind of the power a multinational has to push back against 20th century kind of national regulation.
Yeah, I think...
Sorry, you go first. We'll just pass the mic down.
Sure. I think I'm glad we're talking about kind of what happens on a global stage. I think, we can be very insular looking in Australia, if I may say, in terms of technology and the regulations and laws and ethics associated with it.
So you're saying Australia's backwards?
I would never say that.
If we all look away, someone could punch him, and then we would all be, I guess, okay with it. Anyway, sorry.
No, not at all. I think I've been doing some work recently with the G20 around healthcare innovation and technology, and we talk a lot about breaking down the borders in terms of sharing data, and then as a consequence of that, how do we have global regulations and laws and legislation to police this. So I do think we need to look at it on an international stage and not just country by country. Otherwise, we'll never get anywhere.
Yeah.
Well, I hate to put a damper on the party, but whenever we're talking about globally decisions and things like that, usually it's the most powerful and rich countries that are making these decisions. And while there are different cultural norms that we may not agree with and that we may not necessarily do not abide by our way of life, by making these kind of legislations, we might be enforcing something upon some other culture. So I understand, and there is work in the European Union, and they are looking at it, and it is very important, but I always treat this a little bit hesitantly because I know that people in states, in positions of power, don't necessarily realize that they're in those positions. And it's especially true for countries. So it's a difficult question.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, like you said, that one way we might get somewhere is, there's almost a positive spin on Europe doing these sorts of things, that it can say, well, we're not going to wait for the rest of you to catch up. We're going to throw some clout, and we're a big enough market that if you want to operate here, you've got to comply with this, and so we can drag everyone forward with us. There is potentially some benefit to that, but I know what you're saying, that then we're all taking the value judgments that the Europeans have made for us. And I think, that question that you had, Ellen, at the end of your slides, of where do we draw that hard line, I think we're still working those things out. So we're not in a position yet where we could just say, we're going to sign a treaty that says we all agree on where that line is, because we're not sure yet. In the interim, I think that the regulation should be around that transparency and openness, so that consumers can at least make choices that are informed about which things they want to use and associate, or developers can choose what they want to deploy, or whatever.
Absolutely. So that ends up... Oh, we've got one more. Sorry, you're pointing.
Do it. One from here.
Oh, we want to do a few more. No worries, we've got loads of time. You guys haven't got anywhere to be. Okay, down here.
There's one up the back there in the corner.
All right.
Thanks.
Your beard is lovely.
I believe you because you said so. I visited the ADFA library in Canberra, the Australian Defence Force Academy Library, looking for a publication of mine from the 80s. And I quipped that maybe the iris identification cameras could tell me if I have cataracts. They didn't have that technology in place at all, of course. I'm not so sure about now. So what kind of people would use AI unethically? Who profits, who gains, what qualifications, what motivations? For instance, we could even come at welcoming a total surveillance society, but I don't know about a military totalitarian surveillance society. What do you think?
Okay, we'll leave the evil company out for a moment.
Well, there are instances in my mind already where AI is being used in a way which is not okay. And we've seen, you know, the famous scandal and, you know, Cambridge Analytica and all these things. So that's, while it's not on a military scale, they're actually using it for commercial profit, and definitely not caring about, you know, whose data this is and the privacy of the people and the way it affects people. A lot of these big companies, especially social networks and things like that, they enable serious, it's a harsh word, but serious evil going on, and then they later perhaps donate something to help take care of the cause, but they're actually enabling it, and they're encouraging it in a way. So these things don't have to take, you know, they don't have to happen on a military scale, and there are plenty of, you know, killer robots examples for the military, but this is happening on an everyday scale with our kids, right? So this discussion is all the more important, because I feel that, you know, legislation is very important, but again, we do not yet know where to draw the line, but everyone does. And, you know, you guys coming here and listening to this and being more informed, and next time when you're choosing to use some kind of social media platform or another, perhaps declining or not sharing a picture, or not, you know, or not just skimming through the consent, but reading it, or not authorizing. That's all a step in the right direction. That's all, you know, community power coming into play and saying we won't. I see you don't agree with me, but it's a step in the right direction, at least. Well, I know, but it's because at this point, there are not yet laws, and it is being processed. We do not yet know where the ground, you know, where the red line is, and we're working on it, and everyone is working on it, and everyone is at least aware that it needs to be so. But the public needs to be aware that there's a problem.
Yeah. Sorry, Ellen, you wanted to...
I just wanted really quickly to reflect on your example of using facial recognition to detect cataracts, which could also be part of a surveillance society. And I think this is where we become enmeshed in these real ethical conundrums, which is, to give Niels' example from the slides of deepfakes, that's empowered by TensorFlow, which is an open source image recognition library released by Google, which has phenomenally widespread, useful, powerful purposes for exactly the kinds of tools like detecting cataracts, detecting forms of cancer, helping people with visual impairments navigate the world. It was released openly, freely, for anyone to use. So not just commercial companies. Niels in the University of Melbourne can pick it up and do research with it. It also facilitates the rise of programs like deepfakes, because anyone can pick it up and use it for Machiavellian purposes, for mean, nasty, cheap reasons. And then it just becomes, like, I'm an open source advocate. I believe in sharing things because they have the power to do good. But I genuinely don't know, as a woman, if I had known something like deepfakes was possible, whether I would still champion TensorFlow as much. It's always the case that there's always certain kinds of people that seem to continue to be hurt, like no matter what the technology can be used for.
Same like Terry.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, and I agree with everything that Ellen is saying, but I think it's a human problem. It's not a machine problem. I mean, the machines aren't doing bad things. Humans are doing bad things with the machines.
Yeah.
And we had that thousands of years ago with, you know, gunpowder, great firework displays, and then that was weaponized. It's not necessarily a debate around technology. It's very much a, you know, if humans want to do bad things, humans will do bad things, whether it's with technology or something else.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily think that should stop us from advancing technology for things like developing laser eye surgery for cataracts and because we're worried about laser guns killing us, you know.
And there's
it's
arseholes everywhere, even in this room. Some of you are arseholes and you may not even know it. So don't be evil. Now, what we may do, I think you said you want to take one more question from online, but what I'll ask is just for a very short sort of answer, if you can.
Yeah, look, one question that was asked anonymously was, do the panellists think that there's a chance that we'll build AI that's more intelligent than humans?
Oh, all right, maybe we'll just take this in reverse order then as a last question. So, do you believe in it? Oh, is it from a law perspective, is that scary that if we replace whatever.
Yeah, for sure. But
Yeah.
like, I don't know. The people who are closer to the tech are going to have a better idea of that than me.
Yeah,
I'm not
absolutely.
sure at all.
Yeah, more?
Well, and AI is not intelligent. It does a certain task, and it could do it better than people, and especially classification problems, it already does, you know. But still, you need, I still feel you need a person there to override it and to be able to monitor it. And you initially need a person to feed in the data, and you need a person to provide this data. And AI, it's not intelligent. It doesn't think. It does what you tell it to do. It could do some tasks well better than people, but yeah. It could do some tasks better than people, but that's not necessarily, you know, intimidating. It's just, you know, with great power comes great responsibility, so you need to know how to use it.
Given as humans we can't agree on a definition of intelligence, I don't know how we'll know when we've surpassed it.
No, I fully agree with Ellen. I think thank you. It's the definition of intelligence. I think machines are much better at doing some things, you know, like reading 800 million pages of unstructured text per second. We can't do that. We're probably a little bit better at maybe compassion and empathy. So I think that humanity-technology combination is good. They're better at some things and we're better at others.
Fantastic. Well, I think that's a great sort of note to leave it on. Everyone, thank you so much. Please, let's thank the panel again for their time. Now stay where you are. Over to you.
What a fantastic panel, and what a phenomenal evening this has been tonight. If you are new to AI ethics and you want to learn more, we actually run an AI ethics book club. So we meet every third Monday in Adelaide and everywhere else online. So you feel free to join in. It's led by the wonderful Owen Churches, who put together this wonderful slide. And if you want to learn more about the AICN, go to our website and join the community on Slack. We're a national community and you can find us on most channels. And we'd love for you to provide feedback on the evening. If you've registered for the event, you'll receive an email with the survey link. Otherwise, scan the QR code or follow the link and you can go in the draw to win one of 3 copies of Ellen Broad's Made by Humans, The AI Condition. Stick around for some networking, no matter where you are. And in Adelaide, you can head next door to the mural room where we have a grazing table and more drinks. Thank you again to our audience all around the country and everyone here tonight. Thank you to our panel. Thank you, Andy Stapleton, Terry, Sweeney, Ellen Broad, Maura Vered, Daniel Kiley. Have a good evening.